Hey Wargamers, it happened again. The Tau Codex was leaked pretty far in advance of the actual release. We were barely into the actual previews of the Codex, and it is almost out in its entirety thanks to someone who has snapped a few pictures. So if you like opening your Christmas presents early, this is the week for you. Now, we have almost the full Codex. We have 4 detachments. We have the Kauyan, the Manka, the Retaliation Cadre, and then the Kroot Hunting Pack. We have most data cards, and we also have the points for those data cards from the book. Now, of course, those are likely to change pretty quickly, but there's still something to go off of. So that's what we have so far. It confirms a bunch of units that are going to Legends. This has been an ongoing discussion here on this channel as well as others. So we know that the old Crisis Suit unit, of course, is going away. Games Workshop telegraphed that early. The Shaper is going away as well because we have our new 3 varieties of that. Unshi, Unva, and Longstrike, as predicted, are going the way of the Dodo because they are hard to, basically hard to get fine cast models, so they're just getting rid of them. The Crisis Commander, also a casualty of this. There is no more standard Crisis Commander because Games Workshop does not market a standard Crisis Commander. They only market the Cold Star and the Enforcer suits. So that is why that guy is gone. Now you only have 2 commander varieties to pick from, and tactical drone units are also axed. That makes a lot of sense considering drones don't exist anymore. So, why would you have a unit of things that don't exist? Yeah. All right. That said, we do have a bunch of our key questions answered. In particular, we know how the different Crisis Suit units work. We know their different compositions, your options. We know what their special rules are. What do the rest of the new Kroot do? We know what the Kroot Hunting Pack detachment rules are. We understand what all the interactions and special rules for those different units are as well. And we also get to see how some existing units have seen some meaningful updates. So those 3 questions are really what I'm going to be talking about today. We will be going over each data card, each data sheet in depth in the future. We'll be going over detachments in depth in the future. We will be doing our typical staple point efficiency videos, our math hammer videos in the future as well. Today we are just talking about some of the big changes and big takeaways from this massive leak. Now, of course, that first one, how do the new Crisis units work, was one of the biggest questions I had after the preview. What do these other variants of Crisis Suits do? Basically, if you haven't figured it out by now, Crisis Suits are being split into 3 archetype units. No longer do you have your Jack of all trades, highly customizable Crisis unit. Instead, you have 3 very rigidly prescribed Crisis units of different loadouts. And so across those 3 different units, we see some pretty big changes compared to their predecessor. One of them is that they only have 2 weapon slots. So no matter which of the 3 you're taking, you only get 2 weapons max, 2 fusion blasters max, 2 plasma rifles max, 2 flamers max. No matter what you're taking, you have 2 max. No more triplicate weapons. And that means that generally, we're seeing at least a 33% reduction in offensive capability, all else equal, just based on that. You are no longer allowed to take duplicate drones either. So it used to be that you could take 2 shield drones and bump the wounds characteristic up by 2 on each of your suits. A pretty decent amount of increased durability that you could get just from taking drones. No longer can you do that. You can take 1 shield drone, 1 marker drone, or 1 gun drone. That is it. You still get 2 of those. You can still take 2 drones, but you cannot duplicate drones, which is a bit of a kick in the teeth. The support systems are fixed. They are specific to the archetype. They are no longer flexible. You either have a Battlesuit support system or a weapon support system. You do not have the option of which to choose. Turbojets, the thing that basically made your advance rolls 6 inches instead of having to roll for it, not a thing anymore. They don't exist. So your Crisis Suits are much more reliant on making some good advance rolls if you want them to advance. They are not as fast. No shield generator. That is just not an option. That is nowhere to be found on any of the 3 archetype profiles. Shield generator is still an option for your commanders because they are still completely customizable with some minor exceptions. In particular, when we're talking about like cyclic ion blasters, AFP, those are limited to 1 per model. But aside from that, you still have all your customization, including shield generators. For standard crisis suits, no shield generator at all. Another huge disadvantage in terms of their durability. And then finally, units are capped at 3 models. There are no 3 or 6 versions. It is just 3 models. So if you're looking to really leverage stratagems, enhancements, characters, that does not work the same way as it did in the index. You only have 3 models at most you can put in a unit, and that wording is even misleading because you have 3 models. That's it. No more, no less. That's what you get. And so that really does limit your options in terms of looking for synergy and leveraging these other types of rules for advantage on a big unit of crisis suits. So all of these things make crisis suits worse. Full stop. Right? They have less firepower, they have less durability, they have less mobility. All of these things make them worse. And so really, it seems like Games Workshop wants us to shift our perspective away from them being crisis suits as kind of this awesome unit that we kind of hold up on a pedestal. At least I do. I've always wanted crisis suits to be good, and in the recent history they have been. That has not always been the case, certainly, but I've always wanted crisis suits to be good, and I've enjoyed their reign as kind of these extremely effective units. Games Workshop wants us to not think about them like that. They do not want us to think about this unit as being like a Death Star unit. They want us to think about this as being just another slightly above battle line unit. They certainly have assets, they certainly have strengths, certainly things that make them special, but they are not a unit that you're going to just necessarily bring one of and say, oh, this is going to dictate my entire strategy. If you are bringing crisis suits and you bring one unit, that will be a relatively minor component of your strategy. If you bring crisis suits and you bring lots of them, that will be the majority of your strategy, but no longer will you bring just a relatively small amount, let's say 6, and have that be the basis for your gameplay. There are some trade-offs with this. Of course, the suits are cheaper now. That was one of the big promises in the preview from Games Workshop, was that these would be cheaper suits, so that the pricing actually reflects their output. And yes, to some extent that's true. You're saving between 30 and 55 points on a unit of 3 now compared to what you were doing before. But see above, right? You see all these things that are worse off for these units. And at a bare minimum, right, we're looking at a reduction from 3 to 2 weapons. So again, that's a 33% reduction. We do not surpass a 33% reduction in price on these units. So that's rough. We are not getting a proportional reduction in their base cost just based on their profile. We do see that having units of 3, for example, does allow a little bit easier, a little bit more ease in utilizing bonded heroes because it allows you to get closer potentially. You're not as constrained for getting like a big unit in a particular space. Small units are easier to position, so there's a very kind of tangential benefit there, or an indirect benefit there. There are other rules that partially at least compensate for this. So if we're looking at the retaliation cadre, we do see that even though these suits are on their own worse, in isolation they are worse, they do get some nice bump ups from things like the retaliation cadre, its rule of bonded heroes, but also some of its enhancements and stratagems all do allow for crisis suits to play better than is apparent just looking at kind of this initial impressions, high level kind of comparison. There's more to it than that. So don't get fully distracted by the negative here. There is a silver lining, and it's hard to say if that silver lining is, overwhelms the negative. We have to kind of play around with it and see, but there are good things about this. And for those good things, see my last video talking about the retaliation cadre, because it does look like it offers some really nice benefits. And so the retaliation cadre, the new detachments, are really good. There's really strong enhancements and they're very strong stratagems, particularly for the retaliation cadre if we're mixing it with Farsight, which we'll talk about in a minute. As far as the crisis suit unit specific rules, so for the 3 archetypes that we have in the new codex, it did answer a few questions that I had. In particular, for the Sunforge, the big question was, is a twin fusion blaster a new weapon, or is it twin linked, or what's the deal? And looks like that was just an editorial issue. Sunforge suits just have 2 fusion blasters. That's it. It's nothing special about the fusion blasters. It's just 2 of them, like you would expect. For the fire knife, that's the plasma rifle missile pod variant. We did see a pretty, just a little bit of salt in the wound, I'm going to say. A little bit of salt in the wound on this. Plasma rifles got nerfed down to 18-inch range from 24. And keep in mind, in the previous edition, they had an even larger range. So now, historically, they had 24-inch range. So going back to 24 was not unexpected. But then down to 18, they have never been that short of range. And this is kind of weird because they are pairing them specifically with missile pods, which are a long-range weapon. And so having the plasma rifle and the missile pod together is a little bit incongruent, right? You want to have weapons that are of comparable range, and that is not the case for the plasma rifle and missile pod here. If you're using the missile pod, that gives you the ability to kind of hang back and lob shots. But if you have the plasma rifle, it doesn't matter if you have the missile pod. You got to get up close. Maybe this doesn't matter for the retribution cadre, because that is basically a detachment that wants you to get close, right? That is definitely paying you to get close. And so who cares what your range is? You're going to get close no matter what. So, plasma rifles probably, don't care about the range change too much in that detachment. But in other ones, they probably do, like in Kao Yun, for example. Of course, this also gives us the special rule for the fire knife, which allows us to reroll ones to hit against any target, and if that target is below starting strength, then you get full rerolls to hit, which is a pretty massive benefit, especially given the low number of shots that a fire knife is probably going to have. If you're taking plasma rifles, that's certainly a small number of shots. Missile pods, you end up with 4 shots. So having those rerolls to hit will help quite a bit, and it is independent of being guided, which is a nice benefit. For your Starsight, that's your Flamer, Burst Cannon archetype suit. They have a special rule that gives them +1 AP against basically any target that's not a monster or vehicle, and that's a pretty big benefit considering the types of weapons that they have, right? They are both high volume of fire, low quality shots, and so having that bit of AP actually goes a really long way on its own, but it starts to get even stronger when you look at the retaliation cadre and the bonded hero special rule. Being able to bump flamers to be strength 5 -2 AP is certainly not bad, or burst cannons to being strength 6 -2 AP, also not bad. If you're taking a unit of flamers, that's on average 21 hits. If you're taking a unit of burst cannons exclusively, that's 2 burst cannons, 8 shots per suit. Again, 24 shots just off the bat there. And then depending on how you're doing your buffs and everything, that could be almost 24 hits. So really a lot of opportunity there to be dealing a lot of pretty decent quality shots that can do a wonder against infantry. One of the next big questions I had was, what is the deal with the rest of the Kroot? Like, what do the rest of the Kroot do? Most of the previews have actually been on the Kroot, right? Most of the previews that we've had for this book have not been on the book specifically, but have been on the new Kroot revamp and the Kroot hunting pack army box. And so that's where most of our information on the Codex actually comes from. And so we've learned a lot about what the different new Kroot units do, but what about everything else? So if we look at the Shapers, we have 3 new Shapers. All of them are leaders, and all of them can lead specifically carnivores and farstalkers. Not hounds, not Krootox. Lone spears are alone, hence the name. So, you know, that's all they lead is those 2 infantry units, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if you had ideas about your trail shaper joining hounds, for example, that's not going to happen. And yeah, there is tons of Kroot in this book. If you look at the army listings, there is just Kroot, 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 Kroot. Lots of Kroot. The War Shaper, he has this ability called War Leader. Basically, gives him a free or a duplicate stratagem once per battle round, and so he can use some of these really good stratagems that are in the hunting pack detachment. Even though they've already been used by a different unit in your army. So a lot of opportunity there to do some pretty cool stuff in terms of multiple attacks, multiple kind of strike and fade things. There's a stratagem that allows them to fall back and then charge again. So you could do that with multiple units and really get a lot of mileage out of a war leader, a war shaper, because of the war leader ability. You also have the option to once per game remove battle shock from a unit. Certainly not a bad thing on a unit like Kroot Carnivores, which are going to be, let's face it, vulnerable to battle shock, or really any Kroot unit, right? So that's a nice little, kind of cleanup ability. The Flesh Shaper, this is a guy that we didn't know that much about. He gives sustained hits 1 for the unit he joins. That's awesome, especially for a big unit of carnivores, for example, where you're going to be pumping out a lot of shots. Sustained hits 1 is useful, let's say. He also gives them a 6 up feel no pain, which gets boosted to a 5 up feel no pain after they defeat a unit in melee. Basically, you're eating the foes, so you get the 5 up feel no pain, and that's kind of the mechanic that we had hypothesized or speculated about when they showed us this guy. So I'm glad they went that way instead of just a pure healing mechanic or something like that. The Lone Spear, we got a really good preview on him, but there were a few lingering questions. One of them is he actually a character? Can he serve as a character for some of the Kroot Hounds abilities, for example? And the answer is yes, he is a character, and yes, he does have Lone Operative. No, he is not a leader. He cannot join any units, but he is a character with Lone Operative, which is essential for this guy's role, unless you equip him with a javelin. So having a lone operative is going to be really, really useful if you equip him with the sniper rifle, because that is range like 30, 36. He's hanging out back potentially. But if you equip him with the javelin, that thing is assault and blast with an 18-inch range, D6 shots, strength 10, AP -2, 2 damage. A really nice little explosion that he can deliver with this thing. And so Lone Operative might be a little bit less useful there. That's okay. The Javelins, seem like they are some nice damage dealing. Plus, being blast, being D6, you have a higher chance of potentially, landing some hits. You're not going to run into the issue where you have the one shot and you miss with the one shot, unless you roll a 1 for your D6. But right, like you're kind of playing the odds here that you're not going to roll a 1. Never say that. Never say that. But still, nonetheless, more shots means more likely hitting, and hitting is what we want the Lone Spear to do, because that unlocks rerolls for the rest of your Kroot, and that's what the best thing about him is. So the Javelin is attractive in that regard. We also saw that Kroot Infantry, so the carnivores and the farstalkers, both get some pretty big boosts. Carnivores get a revised version of Fieldcraft, and now gives them sticky objectives. So once they control an objective, they control it even if they're not on it, unless it is controlled by an opponent. So allows a little bit more dynamic play. They don't have to camp. They can just, take an objective at the beginning of the game, run up the board, go do Kroot stuff instead of just hanging out and back or whatever. That's something that's really, really important for Kroot, especially if you're thinking about them as an entire army, because without that, they would, literally be sitting ducks, right? They would just be sitting on the objective waiting to get shot at, and they don't have the durability to deal with that. So having sticky objectives is a huge benefit for carnivores, makes playing them as an army much more feasible. They can be a bodyguard unit, so if you take a unit of 20, they get 2 leaders, which is, surprising. Yeah, it's almost like somebody might have thought about this when they were designing the Kroot hunting pack box, or either chicken or the egg, right? But yeah, if you look at the Kroot hunting pack box, you get 20 carnivores, 2 leaders. Oh, look. It's exactly what it's exactly what this is really designed to do, right? So Unit 20 can have 2 leaders. I kind of think taking the Flesh Shaper and the War Shaper is a really good combo. War Shaper unlocks those duplicate stratagems. Flesh Shaper gives you sustained hits and gives you some nice durability with the Feel No Pain. That seems like a really attractive combo. And so I wouldn't be surprised if you see, even outside of the Kroot Hunting Pack detachment, these big blocks of Kroot, because of the sticky objectives, because of the ability to take these 2 leaders and do some cool stuff. If you're not using the hunting pack detachment, you don't really have stratagems that are going to benefit Kroot aside from the standard ones, and so maybe the War Shaper isn't the way to go. Maybe there you take the Trail Shaper instead. Time will tell. The Codex isn't even out yet, but that's kind of where my mind goes with that. Farstalkers are definitely mercenaries. They've done some interesting things, and if you've paid attention to kind of the design commentary on Kroot, this is in line with that. They really want to have a little bit more separation between kind of the Kroot culture as a whole, your standard Kroot from Peck, and then the more mercenary Kroot that have ventured off, seen the galaxy, and are guns for hire. And that's what the Farstalkers are. The Farstalkers are the mercenary version of Kroot. The Kroot carnivores, other Kroot, are a little bit more civilian. Right, they're not quite as well traveled as the Farstalkers. So the Farstalkers get some cool rules. They still get the Ignorus cover from the Pekra. That's not new, but they still have it. But they also get lethal hits and precision against one unit, and that's very similar to some of their earlier rules. But being able to pick on that one unit and really hammer out a few nice hits against it. Has a place most in most matchups. I think the Kroot Hunting Pack detachment as a whole helps all the Kroot a tremendous amount, but especially if we're looking at carnivores and Farstalkers, they get +1 to hit or to wound against units that are either below starting strength or below half strength, respectively. So if the target is below starting strength, you get +1 to hit. Once it gets below half strength, you also get +1 to wound. That's massive. If you think about the number of shots that Kroot carnivores can pump out, especially if you're thinking about a big block of 20 of them, +1 to hit and +1 to wound is huge. And then if you get sustained hits 1 because of a Flesh Shaper in there, you're getting some nice numbers rolling with this thing. So Kroot Hunting Pack with carnivores seems like it has some momentum behind it. They also get a 6-up invulnerable save against melee and a 5-up invulnerable save against shooting when they're in the detachment. That's true for all Kroot again within the detachment. But that's a nice little backup too, because one of the biggest problems with Kroot is their lack of well, it's been a lot of different things, but they're not exactly robust. They don't take a punch very well, so giving them that invuln save combined with the Feel No Pain, that will add up. And then some of the last remaining question marks for the Kroot were things like the Krootox Riders. The Krootox Riders have a special ability now that allows them to return fire against enemies that shoot at nearby Kroot. So if they're hanging out, a nearby unit of Kroot gets shot at, they can shoot back as if it was their shooting phase. Always a nice thing in a Tau army, whether you're playing Kroot or Tau, you have this ability that allows you to shoot outside of your normal turn order. Fantastic. Especially when you look at the revised weapon profiles on the Krootox Rider. Repeater, the thing that has taken the place of the Kroot gun is the repeater cannon. That's rapid fire 2, basically, giving you multiple missile pod shots outside of your turn. So that is a really nice weapon and something that I would think would be a common choice here. When you have the hunting pack and the lone spear alongside this thing, you are dishing out consistent damage, right? The hunting pack gives you those benefits we just talked about with to hit and to wound. Lone spears give you full rerolls to hit if you are shooting at something that they hit. And so those two things together are adding up to a lot of really consistent damage from these guys. Similarly, Rampagers also benefiting from both of those things. Again, remember the Lone Spear benefits are for shooting and melee. It is not strictly for shooting. So Rampagers get a lot of benefit out of this too. They are the new melee version of a Krootox Rider. They have a kind of a Hammer of Wrath ability. Basically, for each model, you roll a d6 on a 4-up that does d3 mortal wounds on the charge. So a nice little chunk of damage just from charging. This is a very common mechanic. We see it with things like Carnifexes and whatever. So it's nice to see it here. It is something that we've seen like with Tank Shock for Crisis Suits, and now Kroot can do it too, just without a stratagem. So that's great. If a model dies from that Hammer of Wrath ability, it causes Battle Shock, or at least they have to test for Battle Shock, which the more Battle Shock tests you can induce, the better off you'll be. They have a ton of attacks too. So the Rider has 3 attacks, strength 4, -1 AP, 1 damage lance. So on the charge you get +1 wound. Again, that will stack with these other benefits, and so you're getting a lot of damage just from that. The Rampager, the Krootox itself, has 4 attacks at strength 6, -1 AP, 2 damage. And again, thinking about hunting pack benefits, lone spear benefits, those are going to do some damage. And so these guys seem like they have a nice profile to do a lot of damage to things like elite infantry, things that are going to have a couple wounds, a decent armor save. They're going to have something to worry about when Rampagers are on the board. They're not really going to be necessarily great against these heavier units, and they might be a bit overkill for infantry. So they kind of are in this mid-range unit where you'd want to deploy them against elite infantry. Otherwise, if you're just looking to induce battle shock or cause some trouble, you can throw them against whatever. But these guys have some nice offensive capabilities combined with some nice utility with the battle shock mechanic. All right, and the last big question I had was if there were some meaningful adjustments to existing units. Of course, there are plenty of units that are returning in the Codex. It's not all new stuff. It's not all Kroot. What happened to those guys? Does anybody see some meaningful changes? And probably the biggest one is with strike teams. Strike teams used to have this ability that allowed them to fire Overwatch for free. It was not worth it, not that exciting, especially when you compared them to things like Breachers. Strike teams just didn't have the same utility. However, now they have this ability that allows them to select one infantry unit that they hit in that shooting phase and make it become what they call suppressed. And suppressed units essentially just have -1 to hit. So you're more or less dishing out stealth to a unit that unit you shot at is targeting, which is pretty nice, right? Like -1 to hit is not anything to scoff at, and if all you have to do is hit it with your strike team, that is a pretty low bar, and you could get a lot of value out of that. So depending on what the rest of your list looks like, that might be really useful, especially if you're looking at something that isn't going to hold up as well. Having -1 to hit in abundance in your list is probably going to help out. Maybe this is part of the reason why crisis suits aren't quite as durable as they used to be, because if they now are -1 to hit, that might be, in some people's opinion, too far in one direction. So having the -1 to hit out there does help compensate for some of these less desirable changes in some units like crisis suits. And then, of course, Farsight. Farsight has this wonderful, relatively new model, and ever since this model was released, they have not given him much attention in terms of rules. Now, are his rules now where I had hoped they would have been when Arcs of Omen came out or when the Index came out? No, but I think he is definitely moving in the right direction. So Farsight still has the +1 to wound within 9 inches rule, but if we consider that within the context of the retaliation cadre, that suddenly is more meaningful, right? We get the benefits to strength, to AP, to wounding here, and so that all adds together for Farsight to make him even more imposing than he is just on his own. And really, if you're bringing Farsight, you're probably going to think about the retaliation cadre at least a little bit. He also gets an ability much like the War Shaper that gets a free duplicate stratagem. So one of the things about like the retaliation cadre is the stratagem that allows you to drop in outside 3 inches of an opponent costs 2 CP. You can use Farsight to do that for free and save yourself some nice CP there. So things like that make a big difference. Being able to do your strike and fade, I think they call it the Torch Star Gambit now. Being able to do that for free with a unit adds up, and being able to also do that with 2 units makes a big difference. So having that ability is clutch. He also got bumped to a 2-up save. That's nice. And then the last big change is Stealth Suits. Stealth Suits used to have the ability that when they were the observer, you could reroll 1s to wound. Now it's reroll 1s to hit and to wound when they're the observer. So no longer are they reliant on kind of tag teaming with Shadow Sun to really get the most utility. They have the rerolls 1 to hit and to wound when they're the observer ability. So that is going to go a long way and make you consider Stealth Suits much more than maybe you would otherwise. Again, really putting them in a nice position for the retaliation cadre, but also other detachments more broadly, because that role as an observer is, frankly, critical. So without Tetras, Stealth Suits become a very important unit because of this, and we don't know what the future holds for Tetras, so it's worth keeping these in your back pocket, at least just for this, if the Tetra goes the way of the Dodo as well. Alright, so those are some of the big questions I think have been answered now that most of the Codex has been leaked. Again, we didn't go into a lot of specifics about the different detachments and things like that, but there is plenty of time to talk about that, plenty more to talk about, and I look forward to picking it apart because, yeah, there's so much to talk about. I think overall, I'm pretty happy and excited about some of the directions that this codex has gone. Certainly, there are things about it that are well, frankly, a little deflating, right? When we look at crisis suits on, kind of that top level of, what changed, what stayed the same, that doesn't feel great. But there are other things like, some of the attachments, some of the synergies that we can see, across the new units of Kroot, some of the synergies we can see across some of these adjusted units like Stray Teams, Farsight, Stealth Suits. I think all of those things really push this to be a much more optimistic change than something that's purely negative, right? Like the changes we see to crisis suits just means we have to play the game differently, and that's okay. That is part of the reason why the game is fun, is that there's this constant co-evolution between us, our codices, and our opponents. So yeah, I'm stoked. I'm excited to see how this codex plays, and I'm hoping it plays dynamically and fun. So let me know what you think in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching, and happy wargaming. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you stuck around to this point of the video, maybe you want to join our Discord community as well. There's a link in the description below. Special thanks to all my supporters over on Patreon, but especially the folks that you see on your screen now. If you want to help make more invasive wargaming videos, consider joining our community over there as well.